I am Cora, 62 years old, and I never thought I would have to buy my own son's house to teach him about respect. After my husband died, I raised Alan on my own, working multiple jobs and sacrificing everything. When I temporarily moved in with him after retirement, I never expected to hear those crushing words at a family dinner: "If you don't pay rent, don't live here." What he didn't know was that I could buy his house 10 times over. Before I tell you what happened when I bought my son's house right from under him, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to teach someone an unexpected lesson about respect. My story begins 15 years ago when my beloved husband Thomas passed away suddenly from a heart attack. At 47, I found myself a widow with a 20-year-old son in college. Thomas and I had been high school sweethearts, married for 25 years. His death shattered our world, but I had to stay strong for Alan. I had always worked in finance, starting as a bank teller after high school and working my way up to becoming a financial advisor. Thomas had been the more visible breadwinner as an engineer, but I was quietly building our nest egg. After his death, I threw myself into work, both as a distraction from grief and to ensure Alan's future. What most people don't know about me, including Alan, is that I became exceptionally successful. While living modestly in the same 3-bedroom home Thomas and I had purchased when Alan was a baby, I was making shrewd investments and building a substantial portfolio. I never flaunted my wealth, believing in living below my means and saving for the future. Thomas and I had always taught Alan the value of hard work and financial responsibility, or at least I thought we had. Alan graduated from college 2 years after his father died with a degree in business. I was so proud when he landed a job at a marketing firm, and even prouder when he met Jessica during his first year there. She was pretty and ambitious, working in the same company, but in the human resources department. When they married 3 years later, I thought my son had found his perfect match. At first, things were wonderful. Jessica called me mom and sought my advice on everything from cooking to career moves. They would come for Sunday dinners every week, and I enjoyed watching their relationship blossom. When they announced they were expecting their first child, Emma, I was overjoyed. Luke followed 2 years later, and I fell in love with my grandchildren instantly. Over time, though, I noticed subtle changes in Jessica. The Sunday visits became less frequent. When I called, she seemed rushed. Alan began to echo her excuses. They were busy building their careers. The kids had activities. I understood, of course. Life gets busy, especially with small children. But something felt different. Last year, at age 61, I decided to retire. After decades of working 60-hour weeks, I wanted to enjoy life and spend more time with my grandchildren. I sold our family home, which had appreciated significantly in value planning, to downsize to a small condo. The housing market was tight, however, and finding the right place was taking longer than expected. When Alan heard about my situation, he immediately offered their guest room. It seemed like the perfect temporary solution. I could stay with them for a few months while looking for my new home and spend quality time with Emma and Luke, now 8 and 6. Jessica smiled and nodded along with the invitation, but I caught something in her eyes that gave me pause. Still, I gratefully accepted, putting most of my belongings in storage and moving in with just the essentials. That was 4 months ago. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs from the very beginning. Alan had changed from the grateful, loving son I raised to someone I barely recognized. The boy who once wrote me heartfelt Mother's Day cards now barely acknowledged my presence. The young man who had cried on my shoulder when he didn't make the basketball team now looked through me as if I were invisible. Jessica, I eventually realized, had been slowly poisoning my relationship with my son for years. What began as subtle comments had evolved into outright disrespect, and somehow she had pulled Alan into her orbit of resentment. I just never expected things to go so terribly wrong. The first real sign of trouble came about 2 weeks after I moved in. I was reading in the guest room when I overheard Jessica talking to Alan in their bedroom across the hall. "How long do you think your mother is actually going to be here?" she asked, her voice carrying easily through the thin walls. "She said a few months, but you know how these things go. Before we know it, she'll be here for good." "Mom said she's looking at condos next week," Alan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "And who's going to help her move? Who's going to check on her constantly?" Jessica pressed. "It'll be us, Alan. We're already stretched thin with the kids and work. We can't become her caretakers." I sat frozen, my book forgotten in my lap. Caretakers I had never asked for or needed anyone to take care of me. Since Thomas died, I had been fiercely independent. The conversation continued with Jessica, listing all the ways my presence was disruptive. The bathroom was always occupied in the mornings. The kids were too excited by having Grandma around. Their routine was disturbed. Alan mostly made non-committal noises, occasionally offering a weak defense that Jessica quickly shot down. That night, I lay awake thinking, perhaps I was overstaying my welcome. But surely, Alan would tell me directly. If there was an issue, the son I raised would never talk about me that way. I decided to be more conscious of my impact on their household. The next morning, I woke up early to make breakfast for everyone. By the time the family came downstairs, I had prepared a feast: pancakes, bacon, fresh fruit, and coffee. Emma and Luke were delighted, but Jessica barely touched her food. "This is too much, Cora," she said. "The kids usually just have cereal. We don't want them getting used to this kind of breakfast every day." "I just thought it would be nice for a change," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Alan focused on his phone, didn't even look up. "Great pancakes, Mom," he mumbled, without tasting them. That became the pattern. Every effort I made to contribute was somehow wrong. When I did the laundry, Jessica said I hadn't folded Alan's shirts the way he liked. When I picked up the kids from school to save her a trip, she said it disrupted their afternoon schedule. When I offered to pay for groceries, Alan said they didn't need my money. One afternoon, I returned from a condo viewing to find my belongings rearranged in the guest room. My personal items had been moved from the dresser top to the drawer, my shoes lined up in the closet, rather than by the door where I left them. "I hope you don't mind," Jessica said when I mentioned it. "It was just looking a bit cluttered in there, and we have the real estate agent coming by to appraise some renovations we're considering." It wasn't the rearranging that bothered me so much as the lack of respect for my privacy. Would they have entered and reorganized a friend's room without asking? I doubted it. The most painful incident happened with my recipe book. I had brought my collection of family recipes, handwritten cards, passed down from my mother and grandmother, along with notes from Thomas and recipes Alan had loved as a child. One evening, planning to make my mother's famous pot roast, I couldn't find the book anywhere. When I asked Jessica about it, she shrugged. "Oh, those old cards. They were falling apart and taking up counter space, so I tossed them during my kitchen clean out." My heart sank. Generations of family history gone just like that. "Alan, do you remember that recipe book? The one with Grandma's apple pie recipe you loved? I asked when he came home. He barely looked up from his phone. Not really. Was it important in that moment? I realized how far we'd drifted apart. The boy who had once helped me make those recipes, who had asked for copies when he first moved out, couldn't even remember them. The final straw came when they planned a family trip to the lake house Alan's company owned. I overheard them discussing it one evening, making plans for the weekend, talking about what the kids would enjoy. It wasn't until the morning they were packing the car that I realized I hadn't been included. "Oh, we assumed you'd want the house to yourself for a few days," Jessica said breezily when I asked. "Plus, the lake house only has 2 bedrooms. It would be tight." I noticed Emma looking confused. "But Grandma always comes to the lake. She helps us build sandcastles." Alan quickly hushed her, helping her into the car seat. "Not this time, Em. Grandma's busy looking for her new place." As they drove away, Luke waving sadly from the back window, I felt a heaviness in my chest I'd never experienced before. Even through raising a teenage son alone, through losing my husband, through the challenges of building a career as a woman in finance in the 70s and 80s, I'd never felt so utterly alone. That night, I called my oldest friend, Susan, who had also been my financial advisor since Thomas died. She listened as I poured out everything that had been happening. "Cora," she said finally, "you've always been there for everyone else. Maybe it's time to put yourself first. What do you really want?" "I want my son back," I whispered. "But I don't think that's possible anymore." What I didn't know then was that things were about to get much, much worse, and that sometimes rock bottom is where you find your strength. The day of the family dinner started like any other. It was Alan's birthday, and despite our strained relationship, I wanted to make it special. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, selecting the freshest ingredients for his favorite meals. I prepared everything from scratch: the lasagna recipe he'd loved since childhood, homemade garlic bread, a salad with my special dressing, and for dessert, a chocolate cake, just like the ones I'd made for his birthdays growing up. Alan and Jessica had invited his siblings, Lisa and Mark, along with their spouses, plus a few close friends from college and work. 15 people in total would be gathering to celebrate my son's 36th birthday. I took extra care with my appearance that evening, wearing a blue dress Alan had once complimented, applying makeup carefully, and styling my silver hair. Perhaps stupidly, I still hoped to bridge whatever gap had formed between us. People began arriving around 6. Lisa hugged me warmly, whispering, "It's so good to see you, Mom. I miss our talks." Mark, always the quiet one, squeezed my hand and kissed my cheek. Their simple gestures of affection nearly brought me to tears after weeks of feeling invisible in my son's home. The dinner started pleasantly enough. Everyone complimented the food, reminisced about past birthdays, and shared updates on their lives. Emma and Luke darted between the adults, excited by the gathering. For a brief moment, it felt like family again. Then, as I served the cake, Jessica broached the subject I had been dreading. "So, Cora, how's the condo hunting going? Any luck?" she asked, her voice sweet, but her eyes sharp. "I've seen a few promising places," I replied carefully. "The market is quite competitive right now." "Well, I hope you find something soon," she continued. "It's so important for seniors to have their own space, don't you think? Somewhere designed with your needs in mind." "My needs. I'm not in a nursing home, Jessica. I'm looking for a condo, not assisted living," I said, trying to keep my tone light, though I felt my face flush. A few uncomfortable chuckles circulated around the table. Lisa shot Jessica a disapproving look. Mom is probably more fit than half the people at this table, Mark interjected. She still does her 5-mile walks every morning. Jessica smiled tightly. Of course. I just meant somewhere where Cora can establish her new life as a retiree. It's such an important transition. The conversation mercifully shifted to other topics as we finished dessert. I began clearing plates, grateful for something to do with my shaking hands. As I returned from the kitchen with coffee for everyone, I heard Alan say my name. Speaking of Mom living here, he said, addressing the table, at large, we've been meaning to discuss something. My stomach dropped. I set down the coffee tray, feeling suddenly lightheaded. The thing is, Alan continued, we've been discussing our finances recently, and with the new roof we need, and Emma's braces coming up. A weird expression crossed Jessica's face, almost like alarm, but Alan pressed on. We think it's only fair that if Mom is going to stay with us long term, she should contribute to the household expenses. A reasonable rent, you know. The table fell silent. Lisa stared at her brother in disbelief. Mark's wife suddenly became very interested in her napkin. I stood frozen, coffee pot still in my hand, as Alan turned to look directly at me for what felt like the first time in months. If you don't pay rent, don't live here, he said flatly. We're not running a charity. The words hit me like physical blows. Charity. After everything I'd sacrificed for him, after raising him alone, putting him through college without a single student loan, supporting his every dream and ambition. But worse than the words was the cold look in his eyes, as if I were a stranger, as if I were nothing. I don't remember setting down the coffee pot. I don't remember what, if anything, I said in response. I only remember the ringing in my ears, the hot shame flooding my face, and the terrible silence around the table. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Some guests made awkward excuses and left early. Lisa stayed close to me, her hand occasionally squeezing mine under the table. Mark had a heated, whispered argument with Alan in the hallway. Through it all, I maintained my composure. I served coffee. I smiled. I declined offers from Lisa and Mark to come stay with them instead. I thanked everyone for coming as they left. Only after the house was quiet, the children asleep, and Alan and Jessica behind their closed bedroom door, did I allow myself to cry. Silent tears at first, then deep, racking sobs, muffled by my pillow. I cried for the little boy who once made me Mother's Day cards covered in glitter, for the teenager who had leaned on me after his father died, for the young man who had proudly introduced me to Jessica, saying, Mom, this is the one. But mostly, I cried for myself, for the woman who had given everything to her child, only to be told she was a burden, a charity case. As the night deepened and my tears finally subsided, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but alongside it grew a steely determination. Alan had made his position clear. Now, it was time to make mine. I didn't know it yet, but the next day would change everything. I woke before dawn, after barely sleeping. My eyes were swollen from crying, but my mind was startlingly clear. I'd spent most of the night remembering all the moments that had led to this point, searching for where I'd gone wrong as a mother. But in those quiet, dark hours, another thought had taken root. Perhaps this wasn't about my failings at all. I dressed quietly and made myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen. The house was silent, everyone still asleep after the party. On the refrigerator, Emma's artwork hung alongside a calendar marked with appointments and activities. Looking at the family schedule at this home that had no place for me, I made my decision. At 7:30, I called Susan. She answered on the first ring. "Cora, are you okay? You never call this early. I need your help, Susan, and I need your discretion." I explained what had happened at the dinner, my voice steady despite the fresh pain. "Those ungrateful little—" Susan began, but I cut her off. "I need information, not anger. Though I appreciate the sentiment. Can you find out about the financial situation of their house? Alan mentioned a new roof braces. I suspect they're having money problems." Susan was quiet for a moment. "This is highly unusual, Cora. Are you sure I've never been more certain of anything in my life?" An hour later, Susan called back. What she told me confirmed my suspicions, and more. Alan and Jessica had refinanced the house twice in 3 years, pulling out equity for what Susan discovered were credit card debts and a failed side business Alan had tried to start without telling me. More shocking, they were 3 months behind on their mortgage, and the bank had begun foreclosure proceedings. "So that's why they suddenly needed rent money from me," I said, the pieces falling into place. "It's not about contribution. They're desperate. According to my contact at Midwest Federal, they've been trying to work out a payment plan, but Alan and Jessica haven't been responsive. The house is scheduled for auction in 60 days. I took a deep breath. How much to pay off the mortgage completely? Susan named a figure that was substantial, but well within my means. And can the bank sell it directly to another buyer before the auction? If the full amount is offered, yes. The bank would prefer that to an auction. But Cora, are you sure about this? This is your retirement money we're talking about. It was never about the money, Susan. I need to do this. Over the next 3 days, I worked with Susan and a real estate attorney she recommended. We contacted Midwest Federal and made an offer to purchase the house outright, clearing the existing mortgage. Because the bank would avoid the costs of foreclosure and auction, they were eager to accept. All this happened while I continued to live under Alan's roof. Each morning, I made breakfast as usual. Each evening, I prepared dinner. I maintained pleasant, if distant, conversations with Jessica and played with my grandchildren. If Alan and Jessica noticed my extended phone calls or my brief absences for meetings with the attorney, they didn't mention it. They were too preoccupied with their own concerns. I overheard multiple tense conversations about money, always ending abruptly when I approached. Jessica began taking extra shifts at work. Alan stayed up late into the night, the glow of his laptop illuminating his worried face. Once, I almost faltered in my resolve. It was when Luke crawled into my lap. As I read him a bedtime story, his small hand patting my cheek. "Grandma, are you sad?" he asked. "Sometimes, sweetheart," I admitted. "Everyone gets sad sometimes." "When I'm sad, ice cream helps," he said, with the wisdom of a 6-year-old. I hugged him tightly, wondering how my actions would affect these innocent children. But then, I reminded myself that I wasn't taking their home away. I was securing it, ensuring they would always have a place to live. The terms might change, but their security would remain. A week after the disastrous birthday dinner, I received a call from the attorney. The sale had gone through. I was now the legal owner of the house where my son and his family lived, where I had been told I could only stay if I paid rent. That evening, I collected the official documents from the attorney's office: the deed, the property transfer papers, the new insurance policies, all in my name. I had them make copies, which I placed in separate envelopes. As I drove back to what was now legally my house, a complex mixture of emotions swirled within me. There was no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, only a profound sadness that it had come to this, alongside the certainty that it was necessary. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment looking at the two-story colonial that Alan and Jessica had purchased 5 years ago. I remembered how proud he'd been to show it to me, how he'd talked about Emma and Luke growing up there, maybe even more children someday. Now it was mine, and tomorrow everyone would know it. I spent the night finalizing my plan. I decided to host another dinner, but much smaller this time. Just us, the immediate family. I wanted Emma and Luke present because despite everything, I believed in honesty and family unity. Children sense tension regardless, and I wanted them to see that adults can navigate difficult situations with dignity. The next morning, I announced my intention to cook a special dinner that evening. "What for?" Jessica asked suspiciously. "Just to thank you for your hospitality," I said. "I know things have been strained, but you're still family." Alan looked surprised, but nodded his agreement. Jessica seemed ready to object until he shot her a pointed look. I suspected they saw this as my farewell dinner, perhaps thinking I'd finally found a condo and would be leaving soon. I spent the day cooking, creating simple foods the children loved: homemade macaroni and cheese, roasted chicken, green beans with almonds, and a mixed berry cobbler for dessert. Comfort food seemed appropriate for what would undoubtedly be an uncomfortable evening. As I set the table, I placed a sealed envelope at each place setting. Inside each was a copy of the deed showing my ownership of the house, along with a personal note. For Alan and Jessica, the note was straightforward. "We need to talk about new living arrangements." For Emma and Luke, I had written simple messages of love, assuring them that Grandma wasn't going anywhere. At 6, we sat down to dinner. The atmosphere was tense, despite my efforts at pleasant conversation. Emma chattered about school, oblivious to the adult undercurrents. Luke pushed his food around, sensitive as always to the emotional climate. Eventually, Alan cleared his throat. "So, Mom, have you found a place?" The moment had arrived sooner than I expected, but I was ready. "Actually, yes," I said calmly. "I've secured a wonderful home. I'm very excited about it." Jessica visibly relaxed. "That's great news, Cora. When do you move in?" "I already have. I picked up the keys yesterday." Alan frowned, confused. "But your things are still here. That's the interesting part," I said, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "You see, the home I'm talking about is this one." I gestured to the envelopes. "Perhaps you'd like to open those." Alan reached for his envelope. First, his brow furrowed. Jessica followed suit, her movements sharp and impatient. The children, excited by what seemed like presents, tore into theirs as well. Alan was the first to understand. I watched as his eyes widened, his face paling, as he read the document once, then again. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the deed to this house," I said simply. "I'm the new owner." Jessica snatched the paper from Alan's hands, her eyes scanning frantically. "This isn't possible," she said. "This is our house. We have a mortgage with Midwest Federal." "Had a mortgage," I corrected gently. "It has been paid in full." "What did you do?" Alan demanded, his voice rising. "I bought your house," I explained, keeping my tone matter-of-fact for the children's sake. "After our conversation about rent last week, I looked into your financial situation. I discovered you were in foreclosure. Rather than let the bank take the house, I purchased it." "Grandma, you bought our house?" Emma asked, looking confused, but oddly impressed. "Like in Monopoly." "Something like that, sweetie," I said with a small smile. "This is crazy," Alan said, standing up so abruptly. His chair tipped backward. "You can't just buy someone's house without telling them. The bank can sell to whoever offers to pay the mortgage," I replied. "You were 3 months behind on payments. The foreclosure process had already begun." Jessica began to cry, ugly, hiccuping sobs that startled the children. "You did this to humiliate us," she accused, between gasps. "To get revenge for what Alan said." I shook my head. "I did this to secure my grandchildren's home. And yes, to ensure I would have a place to live while I continue my condo search, without paying rent." Luke's sensitive soul, that he was, began to cry too, though I doubt he understood the situation. Emma looked from her father to me, her young face serious. "Does this mean we're going to move, Daddy?" she asked. Before Alan could answer, I spoke. "No one is moving, Emma. This is still your home. The only thing that's changed is whose name is on the paper." Alan sank back into his chair, looking stunned. "You couldn't possibly have that kind of money," he said, almost to himself. "You worked at the bank. Dad was the one with the good job." It was the first time he'd mentioned his father in months, and it caught me off guard. "Thomas would be so disappointed in you right now," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I explained, "I've been a financial advisor for over 30 years, Alan. I made good investments. I lived frugally. Your father and I both believed in saving for the future." "So what now?" Jessica asked, her voice bitter. "You throw us out of our own home." "No," I said firmly. "This is still your home. You can continue to live here." A flicker of relief crossed Alan's face, quickly replaced by suspicion. "What's the catch?" "Respect," I said simply. "Mutual respect and consideration. The kind family members should show each other." Alan stood again, this time more controlled. "I need some air," he muttered, striding from the room. Jessica looked torn between following him and continuing the confrontation. Ultimately, she chose the children. "Come on, kids. Let's get ready for bed," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. As they left the dining room, Emma turned back to look at me, confusion and worry etched on her young face. I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile, though my heart was breaking at the situation. Left alone, I began clearing the barely touched dinner. The house was eerily quiet, except for the distant murmur of Jessica getting the children ready for bed upstairs. Through the dining room window, I could see Alan pacing in the backyard, phone pressed to his ear. I had done what I set out to do, but there was no satisfaction in it, only a profound sadness that it had come to this, an uncertainty about what would happen next. It wasn't until much later, after the house had gone dark and silent, that I allowed myself to cry again. Not from hurt this time, but from the weight of knowing that while I'd secured a roof over our heads, I might have lost my son in the process. The days following my revelation were filled with icy silence. Alan left for work earlier than usual and returned late. Jessica communicated only when absolutely necessary, in clipped sentences and without making eye contact. The children, sensitive to the tension, became subdued, their usual boisterous play muted. I maintained my routine, preparing meals, tidying the house, and continuing my condo search as promised. I gave everyone space, understanding they needed time to process the dramatic shift in our family dynamic. On the third day, I decided it was time to establish some ground rules. I left a note on the kitchen counter asking for a family meeting that evening after the children were in bed. To my surprise, both Alan and Jessica appeared in the living room at the appointed time. They sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to bolt at any moment. "Thank you for coming," I began. "I know this situation is unusual and difficult. I'd like to discuss how we move forward from here." "What is there to discuss?" Jessica asked bitterly. "You've made your point. You own the house now. We get it." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "This isn't about making a point, Jessica. It's about creating a sustainable living arrangement for all of us, especially the children." Alan finally spoke, his voice tightly controlled. "What exactly do you want from us, Mom?" The question struck me as both simple and impossibly complex. What did I want? Respect, love, the son I had raised to be kind and considerate. But I kept my answer practical. "I want us to establish clear expectations," I said. "I have no intention of disrupting your lives or taking over your home. I simply want to be treated as a valued family member, not an unwelcome guest. So you're holding the roof over our heads hostage until we treat you the way you want?" Alan asked incredulously. I flinched at his characterization, but pressed on. "I'm ensuring I have a stable place to live while I find a new home, and I'm protecting Emma and Luke's stability by preventing a foreclosure." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Jessica's face. "You really knew about the foreclosure?" she asked. I nodded. 3 months behind on payments. 60 days until auction. Alan shot her a warning look, but Jessica seemed past caring about secrets. "How did you find out?" she demanded. "I have connections in the banking industry," I replied simply. "But that's not important now. What matters is where we go from here." I proposed a structured arrangement. I would continue to search for a condo, taking my time to find the right place rather than settling out of desperation. While living in the house, I would contribute to utilities and groceries, though as the owner, I would handle property taxes and insurance. I would respect their privacy and parenting decisions. In return, I expected basic courtesy and inclusion in family activities when appropriate. "And what happens to the house when you leave?" Alan asked the question he'd been waiting for. "Well, discuss that when the time comes," I said. "My primary concern now is establishing a peaceful coexistence." Jessica laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "Peaceful coexistence. After what you've done, after what I've done." I repeated, my composure finally cracking. "What about what you've done, Jessica? The constant undermining, the disrespect, treating me like an unwanted intruder. And you, Alan, telling your mother she can't stay in your home unless she pays rent. After everything I've done for you." The dam had broken. Years of hurt came pouring out. I reminded Alan of the sacrifices I'd made as a single mother. The second job I'd taken to pay for his sports equipment and summer camps. The college tuition I'd managed without burdening him with loans. The down payment I'd helped with for his first apartment. "You have no idea what it cost me to give you the life you had," I said, tears streaming down my face. "No idea what I gave up. And I did it gladly, because that's what parents do. But I never, ever expected to be treated like a burden in return." Alan looked stunned by my outburst. Jessica stared at the floor. The awful silence was broken by a small voice from the stairwell. "Is Grandma leaving?" Luke stood in his pajamas, clutching his stuffed dinosaur eyes wide with concern. I quickly wiped my tears. "No, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Grandma isn't going anywhere right now. We were just having a grown-up discussion." Jessica rose and went to Luke, guiding him back upstairs. Our family meeting effectively ended. Alan and I sat in uncomfortable silence, until he finally stood. "We can talk more tomorrow," he said stiffly, before following his wife and son upstairs. Alone again, I wondered if Eid made things worse. But perhaps the raw honesty had been necessary. For too long, Id swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. Maybe it was time for uncomfortable truths. The next day brought an unexpected development. While Alan maintained his distance, Jessica approached me as I prepared breakfast. "I didn't know about the foreclosure," she said quietly. "Alan told me we were just refinancing." Again, I studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "You must have signed the papers," I said. She laughed bitterly. "I sign whatever Alan puts in front of me. He's the financial genius in the family, or so he always says." This vulnerability from Jessica surprised me. For the first time, I wondered if she'd been as much in the dark about their financial situation as I had. The conversation was interrupted when Emma bounced into the kitchen, but something had shifted. A tiny crack had appeared in Jessica's armor. Later that day, I received an unexpected visit from Jessica's parents, Robert and Margaret. They arrived unannounced, grim-faced, and clearly on a mission. "Jessica called us," Margaret said, without preamble. "She told us what you've done." I invited them in, offered coffee, which they declined, and listened as they lectured me on family loyalty and manipulation. They insisted I was overreacting to a thoughtless comment that Alan had been under pressure, that I should sign the house back over immediately. When they finally paused for breath, I spoke calmly. "Did Jessica tell you they were in foreclosure? That they were about to lose this house entirely?" Robert and Margaret exchanged startled glances. Jessica hadn't shared that detail. I continued explaining the full situation, how Id discovered their financial troubles, how Id prevented them from becoming homeless, how Id only asked for basic respect in return. By the time I finished, Robert's indignation had deflated. Margaret looked troubled. "Alan always said they were doing so well," she murmured. "The vacations, the new cars, all financed by debt, apparently," I said. "I don't know the full extent of their financial problems, but the foreclosure suggests it's significant." They left in a subdued mood, promising to speak with their daughter. I wasn't sure if they'd be allies or adversaries going forward, but at least they'd heard my side of the story. That evening, Alan came home earlier than usual. He found me in the garden where I'd been weeding to clear my head. "My in-laws called me," he said, without greeting. "They seem to think we're on the verge of bankruptcy." I straightened, brushing dirt from my hands. "Are you?" His jaw tightened. "Our finances are none of your business. They became my business when you told me I had to pay rent or leave," I replied evenly. We stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Alan spoke, his voice strained. "I made some investments that didn't work out. Took some risks. I was going to fix it. By demanding rent from your mother, I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. It was a temporary solution," he exploded, "until I could figure things out. Then you had to go behind my back and buy your house," I supplied. "Prevent your family from being evicted." Alan ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand. I was supposed to provide for my family, not rely on my mother to bail me out. And there it was. The real issue wasn't the house or the money. It was Alan's pride. His sense of himself as provider and protector, undermined by financial failure and then by my intervention. For the first time since this began, I felt a glimmer of understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but comprehension of what might have driven him to treat me so poorly. "Alan," I said more gently, "asking for help isn't failure. Shutting out the people who love you is." He turned away, but not before I saw the sheen of tears in his eyes. Without another word, he walked back into the house, leaving me to wonder if Wed taken a small step toward healing or driven the wedge deeper. 6 months passed, bringing gradual but significant changes to our family dynamic. The initial shock and anger gave way to a tentative new normal, then slowly to genuine improvement. The turning point came about 2 months after I became the homeowner. I'd kept my word about searching for a condo, even touring several promising properties. But something held me back from making an offer. Perhaps it was the way Emma and Luke had begun to relax again, seeking me out for stories and baking sessions. Or maybe it was the subtle shift in Jessica's demeanor, from hostile to neutral, to occasionally even warm. Alan remained the most distant, though even he had begun making small overtures. A cup of coffee placed beside me in the morning, a question about my opinion on a work matter, brief moments of the son he'd known and loved. One evening I returned from a walk to find Alan sitting alone on the front porch, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as I approached, then gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Jessica took the kids to her parents for the night," he said. "I thought maybe we could talk." I'd been waiting for this moment, hoping for it, and fearing it in equal measure. I sat down, saying nothing, giving him space to begin in his own way. He took a deep breath. "I haven't been honest with you, or with Jessica, really, about our financial situation." What followed was a painful confession. Alan had lost his marketing job 18 months earlier, but had been too ashamed to tell anyone. He'd been working freelance jobs, making less than half his former salary, while pretending nothing had changed. The credit card debt had mounted as he tried to maintain their lifestyle. The failed side business had been a desperate attempt to recoup their losses. Jessica knew things were tight, but not how bad he admitted. I kept saying it would turn around soon. I just needed a little more time. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "You know I would have helped." He looked at me. Then, his eyes reflecting the same stubbornness I'd seen in him since childhood. "Because I'm not a child anymore. Mom, I'm supposed to take care of my family, not run to mommy when things get tough." His words stung, but I recognized the pride behind them, the same determination to stand on his own 2 feet that I'd worked to instill in him. "Being an adult doesn't mean facing everything alone," I said gently. "It means knowing when to ask for help. Your father wasn't too proud to lean on me when his company was struggling. We were partners." Alan was quiet for a long moment. "I should have told you what was happening. Instead of treating me like an unwelcome burden," he nodded, shame evident in his expression. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was scared and stressed and taking it out on you. It's no excuse." It was the apology I'd been waiting for, but now that it had arrived, I felt no triumph, only sadness for the pain he'd been carrying, and relief that it was finally in the open. "What happens now?" he asked. "With the house, I mean." "Now we make a plan," I said decisively. "A financial plan to get your family back on solid ground." Over the next few weeks, I worked with Alan to create a comprehensive budget. We met with a career counselor who helped him leverage his marketing experience into a new full-time position. Jessica, once brought fully into the loop, proved to be a valuable ally, identifying unnecessary expenses and suggesting practical economies. I introduced them to Susan, who helped restructure their remaining debt and establish a reasonable repayment plan. We set up college funds for Emma and Luke with small but consistent monthly contributions. The house remained in my name, but we established a rent-to-own agreement. Alan and Jessica would pay me a monthly amount less than their previous mortgage, but enough to be meaningful. The payments would accumulate toward eventually buying back the house. More important than the financial arrangements was the healing of our relationships. Family therapy helped us address the underlying issues: Alan's fear of failure and inability to ask for help, Jessica's resentment of my close bond with Alan and the children, my own tendency to give without boundaries and then feel unappreciated. Emma and Luke thrived in the new atmosphere of honesty and cooperation. They stopped walking on eggshells and returned to being the joyful, sometimes noisy children they should be. Luke no longer asked anxiously if Grandma was leaving. Emma proudly told her friends that her family all lived together and took care of each other. I eventually did find a condo I loved just 10 minutes away, but when I mentioned moving out, it was Alan and Jessica who protested. The kids would be devastated, Jessica said. And honestly, so would we. You've become essential to this household. Plus, Alan added with a small smile, who's going to make sure we stick to our budget. So I stayed, though we rearranged the house to give everyone more privacy. The guest room became truly my room, with my own furniture from storage and a private bathroom added during a small renovation. I had independence within the family structure, coming and going as I pleased, sometimes spending weekends at the condo as a retreat. We established a new Sunday dinner tradition where everyone participated in cooking and no phones were allowed at the table. These meals became a time for open conversation, where even difficult topics could be discussed with respect and care. Alan has continued to grow both professionally and personally. He recently received a promotion at his new company and has been more engaged as a father than ever before. Jessica and I have developed a friendship based on mutual respect, finding common ground in our love for gardening and classic films. The children are flourishing, secure in the knowledge that their family, though unconventional, is strong and loving. As for me, the experience has taught me profound lessons about boundaries, communication, and the true meaning of family. I realized that my own reluctance to show financial vulnerability had contributed to Alan's unrealistic views about money and success. By living frugally while secretly amassing wealth, I'd unintentionally created a disconnect between appearance and reality that Alan had internalized. The greatest gift from this difficult journey has been the opportunity for second chances. Alan and I have rebuilt our relationship on a more honest foundation. We've moved beyond the parent-child dynamic to become adults who choose to be in each other's lives, who value each other's wisdom and perspectives. The house that once represented conflict now stands as a symbol of our resilience and capacity for growth. I'm gradually transferring ownership back to Alan and Jessica as they make their payments, but the true ownership of our family story belongs to all of us together. Life isn't about the properties we own or the appearances we maintain. It's about the connections we nurture and the love we share, even through our most challenging moments. Sometimes, the hardest lessons lead to the most meaningful transformations. And sometimes, you have to buy a house to find your way home. I would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to take drastic measures to teach someone an important lesson about respect? How did you handle family conflicts around money or living arrangements? Please leave a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps me continue sharing these life experiences. Thank you for listening, and remember that it's never too late to heal family wounds and build stronger relationships.